Hello everybody, it's lovely to see you all again for a special episode of Spill the Tea Tutor Talks, and today we are talking about mental health and tutoring, and we are joined by the wonderful Becky, who you may have seen on Twinkl, but if not, Becky, would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely viewers and listeners today?
Hi Susie, thank you so much for having me today. I'm Becky Dawson. I am the National Wellbeing Lead for Twinkl. So I've been in role since March and loving it, and get to talk about my passion, which is wellbeing and mental health and all things in that area.
Oh, lovely. Thanks, Becky. Because it's such an important topic for tutors, but sometimes they're a bit unsure of where to go and who to speak to. So this is going to be a fabulous episode for everyone today. So tutors, we're going to go through some questions today, and hopefully that'll support you. And we're hoping also to create a wonderful blog, so stay tuned to that too. So to kick us off, Becky, we know that mental health is so important, but from your point of view, why do you feel that it's really important for tutors, to be honest, to have that awareness of student mental health, even if they're not, you're not in a school? Why would you say it's as important?
Well, a lot of my work is based around the fact that any adult living with or working with children and young people should have an awareness around mental health. So whatever role you have, it's really crucial. But I think particularly with tutoring, that relationship can be quite intimate in terms of that one-to-one approach, that quite often you might be creating strong relationships that children then feel able to speak to you, sometimes more than they might be able to speak to their class teacher, for example, when there are 30 other students around, or maybe you're not in school at all and this is one of the only interactions you have with someone outside of the home. I've worked with alternative provision with young people not attending school, and lots of them, their tutors were the only people that they really spoke to. So I think it's really important for anyone working with or living with children and young people, but particularly if you're working in one-to-one, because those are the situations where it might be more likely that a young person will bring something up or share something, or you might spot the signs that of concern.
No, and that leads us nicely onto our next question, which is, for tutors, what would you say are some of the kind of signs perhaps that are quite common, or, that would suggest that a student is struggling either emotionally or mentally, or, a little bit of everything, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the important thing to say initially is everyone is different. So there's as much as I'd love to be able to give a manual that says tick all these things off and that will give you the answer, we're all humans and we all kind of display things in different ways. So that's really important to keep in mind. But one of the crucial things is noticing that maybe a young person's behaviour has changed. So if a young person is normally really quite quiet, and then suddenly they seem really outgoing, loud, maybe even aggressive, then that is potentially a sign that something is amiss, that something's going on. But equally, it could be that a young person starts to withdraw, they aren't interacting with you as much, maybe they're coming late to sessions where they haven't been doing that previously. And the three things I kind of focus on are eating, sleeping and moving. And you might be listening to this thinking, well, how am I going to know what they're eating and how they're sleeping? And whilst you don't know the specifics, you can see the impact. If someone's eating, if someone's not sleeping, or if someone is not getting out and moving and exercising, the impact on someone's ability to focus, to concentrate, are absolutely there. So if you can see those things, then it's that's the time to kind of get a bit curious and think about what might be going on.
I think that's it's so important, especially when we think of like GCSEs and A levels, or any major exam for any young person, those key things really. And I think it's quite grounding and good as a tutor sort of to hear that, because it allows you to make that kind of starting point for an inquiry, like you say, Becky.
And also, if you don't mind me coming in here to say, it's also really important not to pathologise young people if they are struggling. Like you said, if they've got GCSEs and A levels coming up, it is normal for them to be anxious. It's normal for that to be a difficult time, because it is a difficult time. So what we don't want to do is start labelling young people as having mental health problems if what we're seeing is they've got 25 exams to do, which some young people do for their GCSEs, and they've got so much and they're just overwhelmed. So it's really important to get that balance of knowing we don't have to label this young person and say they've got a mental health condition. They might just be struggling, they might just be overwhelmed, and actually that's a really normal reaction to the things that they are experiencing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's another really good point. Like you say, it's almost like a snapshot in time. It's not necessarily like you say. It's like if it lasted and carried on, then you like you say, you'd have to consider. No, that is really a really good point. So in that sense, then, from your point of view as a tutor, so many of us are invested in creating that safe space, whether it's face to face or in line. But what would you say is a good way of creating that supportive space? But you're also not kind of crossing any professional boundaries, or might go a bit too far.
Yeah. Well, I actually think that tutors are really good at this, because you have to be able to create a safe space for a young person to learn. And whilst we might think that it's harder to learn in a group setting than it is in one-to-one, it's actually quite intense, isn't it, to do that one-to-one, particularly if you don't know someone. So I think tutors have often got quite a lot of skills in this area of how to make someone feel safe and supported and therefore ready to learn. So, I would kind of remind yourselves of those skills that you already have. But one of the most important things is knowing what those boundaries of your role are and being really clear about them from the beginning. You're not a doctor, you're not a counsellor. The bottom line is you are there to support with maths, English, geography, whatever topic it is that you are doing. And it often comes from the very beginning of the relationship. It is about starting your first session to say, we're working one-to-one. This is the subject that we're doing. These are the things that we're going to be focusing on. If at any point you share anything with me that I'm worried about or that makes me worry for your well-being, I may have to speak to someone else. And that might seem like overkill to do at the beginning, but actually it sets out the stall of the relationship and makes it really clear. What you're not saying is don't tell me anything, but you're saying you do share something with me, I may have to. So then when something comes up and you go, well, I'm going to have to speak to parent, carer, school, whoever, they're ready for that. So it is about setting those kind of limits of confidentiality. But then it is around keeping those boundaries really clear. So even if a young person shared with you that they're worried about their mental health or things are going on, it's not your role to keep checking in with them outside of the session. As much as you might be worrying about them, you need to make sure that you have signposted someone else, i.e. parent, carer, or school, depending on how you're booked, that there is a concern, and that you have given that young person some signposting. So, I used to be a volunteer for Shout's a text service. It's 85258, so quite easy to remember. And they're actually a 24/7, 365-day a year text service that young people can access. And the reason young people like it in particular is it's text. So when I was a volunteer, I used to have young people that were sat on the sofa next to mum or dad, and they'd be texting me, and they could do that without feeling like other people were listening in, or and they could share with me. So being clear that we've come to the end of the session today, you've shared that you're struggling, and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So whoever you're going to speak to, but here's someone else you can speak to in the meantime. And thinking about, I think we're going to talk about signposting later, thinking about the other people that they can connect with. But it's about boundaries are important for both you and the young person. They keep you both safe. It doesn't make you a bad person because you're not making yourself available to that young person 24/7. Because if you present yourself as that and then you're not there, it's even harder for them when they can't cope on it and they feel like they need to rely on you.
Oh no, and thank you for sharing the number as well for that. That's wonderful to know. It can be just what a tutor needs in a sense, to recommend, like you say, and create that boundary. But that leads us nicely on to my next question, which is, so then if you were that tutor and you're concerned and they've listened to you, Becky, your great advice, but they're worried about the student's well-being, what would be those kind of practical steps? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what would be those steps that you'd recommend?
So the first and probably most important step is to listen. And I think what can often happen in these situations is people go into panic mode and they think, oh God, I've got to be able to fix this, I've got to have all the answers. And actually you don't. No one ever has to have all the answers. Even if you're a clinician or a counsellor, you're not the one with the answers. You're helping that young person find the answers themselves. But as a tutor supporting this young person, the most powerful thing you can do is listen and, actively listen. So, don't be thinking about, like, often when we think we're good listeners, we're actually listening to think about what we're going to say back. and we're in our heads going, what am I going to reply to this? How am I going to answer this?
Yeah.
But actually what we just need to do is just listen and really focus on what they're saying. Really try and establish what's going on for them. And then you will need to communicate to parents, carers, whoever has made the referral to you, whoever you're dealing with. Really important that you let the young person know that you're going to do that. So thank you for sharing that with me today. And a lot of this goes alongside safeguarding, which I know, tutors will have had safeguarding training as well, and that's a really important part of the role. So there's a lot of commonalities between dealing with a safeguarding disclosure and dealing with someone talking about their mental health. It's not necessarily a safeguarding issue, but there's a common theme there. So communicating with the parents and carers, thinking about, which organisations you might need to let know. And then, like we talked about, thinking about signposting. So what signposting and empowering that young person, what steps can they take? What do they need to take? So is it about them then having a conversation with parent carers? Is it about them contacting Shout, or Childline is another one they can contact, and kind of leaving them knowing that they've got some steps that they could take? And then it would just be keeping a record of things. So just keeping a record of when you've had those conversations, and that might just be by email. So parent carer to follow up on the conversation, but you've got a record to say this is what happened, the conversation that we had.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I think in a sense that touches on and answers one of my other questions, which is if a tutor is kind of wanting to touch on that topic of almost like maybe like a checking in with the student or the young person, like you say, that listening is really important, and you don't want to kind of put them on the spot. I can imagine that sort of broaching it, in a sense, you've got to be quite delicate and nuanced, perhaps. Yeah,
absolutely. And just because a young person is struggling doesn't mean they're necessarily going to talk to you about it. This might be the only hour of their day when no one's talking to them about it. So I think that's okay as well. If you've got really quite high concerns about them being able to keep themselves safe, then you need to go into a safeguarding. If they're feeling low but they don't want to talk to you about it, that is also fine. But I think it's about curiosity. So if you notice that a young person isn't in the normal mind, or they're struggling to concentrate, being curious, but really powerful is using I statements. So I have noticed that you're much quieter than usual. Is everything okay? I've noticed you're struggling to focus today, rather than you're not with it today, or you don't seem to be right today, or you're kind of making a judgment. But saying I have noticed means it's coming from, well, number one, you're taking notice of them, and that in itself is really powerful for them. But also it's your interpretation. So they might just turn around and go, oh well, my younger sister had me up all night doing X, Y, and Z, and but rather than kind of going in and in quite an accusatory way, it's like, I've noticed this, I have, do you want to tell me more? And kind of open up that opportunity to have the conversation. And they might not, and that is also fine. And we don't push it, and we don't demand that they tell us. It's just about, okay, well, look, if you want to let me know any more, that's absolutely fine. We can talk about it.
Oh no, that's really interesting to hear. And I think again, another sort of powerful little phrase or something to keep in your little tutor toolbox is that I statement, because I suppose even as young people and adults, if you said, oh, you're seeming a bit different, like you say, it is accusatory, but if you like you say I've noticed, it feels a lot more warm in a sense, without crossing that professional boundary, because like you say, it could spin off in a completely different direction if it's in that accusatory way. No, absolutely. And again, just to echo your point about that, it is okay and not to push it. It's like you say, you want them to feel like the door is almost open, per se, with that tutor. It's like, it's okay to talk about, but if you don't want to, I think, and it's good for tutors to hear that as well, especially when you're out of an educational setting, just to hear this. It's very comforting to know. But to sort of go back to an earlier point when we touched upon about when students go through exams, stressful pockets in their lives, which, as you said, might just be within that 25 exam timeline that they've got to go through. But since that's quite a kind of a common thing that tutors go through when working with young people doing their exams. What advice would you give to tutors to support those students in the high pressure times, or any transitions and things like that? What would you say, Becky?
So there's a few different things. I think with anything like exams, transition, it's about preparation and demystifying. It's about, as a tutor, the best thing you can do to support that young person is to prepare them to take the exam in your subject. And that's, that's the crucial thing. And you're giving them those skills already, helping them understand what it will be like to sit that exam, which is, bread and butter for a tutor, isn't it? You don't send the young person into an exam not knowing what the exam is going to be like or how it's going to be structured. So you're actually doing a lot of those things already. But a big part of it is when, particularly if a young person seems completely overwhelmed, which can happen, is about what they can control. And I bang on about control all the time. It comes up when I'm talking to staff about their own well-being, to young people, about reflecting and thinking about what can I control in this situation is really crucial. So if a young person's got lots of exams and they're really worried about it, what can they control? Well, they've only got a certain number of hours in the day that they can revise. That's all they can control. They can control being organised, having a revision timetable, asking questions for things they don't understand, attending their tutor sessions and doing the work that their tutor sets them. That's all they can really control. They can't control the fact they've got to do the exams. That's happening. They can't control where and how they do the exams to much of an extent. So really getting them to think about what can you control and what can you do about it, and kind of keeping them focused on those things. Otherwise we just can get so kind of distracted by and what if I don't pass, and then what happens after that, what if I don't get onto A levels? You can't control that at the moment. You've got to just focus on what am I going to do for the next week or the next hour. And the same with transitions for young people that might be changing schools, for example, or if you're working with A-level students going off to uni, that's a huge change. But they can't really, short of applying to particular unis, going and visiting, demystifying it by getting to know as much as they can about where they're going, there isn't a huge amount they can control.
No, I think that's really true. And in a sense, it kind of takes the pressure off, in a sense, doesn't it? Like you say, if it's like I've got these three things, like you say, the time, the subject, and if I turn up to the session or not, it makes it so much. It's like this little list rather than, like you say, all the what ifs list, which can be really intense. So in that sense, and you shared so many fantastic pieces of advice and strategies, Becky. If you were a tutor who's then sort of thinking, right, okay, I'm taking all of this on board and I want to weave, kind of holistic sense of, well-being into my sessions, what without it kind of becoming a bit too much, like we were saying, like pushing it a bit too much. What would that look like, would you say?
For me, the simplest way to do that would be to have a check-in at the beginning of your session. And actually, that's a really good thing to do anyway. Understanding where the young person is at the beginning of your session will help you to know how that lesson is going to go, what you might need to adapt, how are they feeling. So having a well-being check-in at the beginning, so it doesn't have to be long, depending on how old they are. So if you've got primary young people who are much younger, you could do just like an emoji thing where they just pick an emoji that describes how they're feeling. If it's secondary, a bit older, you can just say one word check-in, how are you feeling today, what's going on for you. And number one, that tells the young person that you care and that actually you understand that their well-being is important to you and to their learning. And number two, it can give you a sense of where they are. And if you do it regularly, so I'd say don't just do it when you're worried about them, because they'll be think, well, that's odd, why are you doing this? That's when you see the change in patterns. So they might come in and go, I'm fed up. And they might say that every session because that's just their default. I've worked with young people who will tell you that you're miserable and they're miserable every day. That's just their default setting. That's not a mental health condition. That's just because that's how they communicate. That's how they're feeling. But you might notice a change if you do that regularly. And then, depending on what they say, if it does sound like they are struggling, what do you need in the next 5 minutes to help you kind of get into the right frame of mind for our session today? Because as harsh as it sounds, that's what they're there for. They're there for the tutor session. You're not being paid to counsel them. And actually, if they are in such a bad place that they can't do the session, then I would argue that that session shouldn't be going ahead, that we should be looking at what other support is available for them to access. It can't turn into a counselling session every week. So who else is better placed to support?
Yeah. Oh no, thank you, Becky. And I suppose that again taps into the topic of tutors protecting their own mental health in a sense. And again, when you said earlier about boundaries are important because it kind of protects you and protects that young person. So for those tutors who are perhaps, they've listened and they're like thinking about their boundaries, thinking like, yeah, you're not the counsellor, you're not this, you're not that, you're here to deliver a session whilst keeping it light, but keeping a check-in, etc. What would you say are some good self-care tips to help a tutor manage their own mental load and also that kind of like emotional labour that could perhaps come with working with students who are going through their own feelings?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things is to have someone else to talk to. So it might be that you've got another colleague who's a tutor, or it might be someone in your family, but someone that you can talk to. Obviously keeping confidentiality, you need to share the details of what's going on, but just being able to offload what you are experiencing can be really important. You can also do that without sharing. You can also keep a journal or just write down after the end of the session, well, this is what we talked about today. And sometimes just going through that process of kind of processing it is really helpful. I would always advocate for thinking about what does self-care look like for you? What do you enjoy doing? I had a particularly stressful morning yesterday, so I watched my favorite TV program while I was having my lunch, and I know that program will always make me laugh and make me feel in a better place. So thinking about what those things are, but genuinely something like Shout is something that you can access as well if you are supporting a young person or lots of young people who are struggling with their mental health and well-being. You can speak to Shout not just about your own mental health, but about the things they are sharing with you, the challenges. So you can go to them and say, well, I've got this young person and X, Y, and Z is happening and we're saying the right things, and that can give you a little bit of reassurance about how you are supporting that young person. So it is really about, I've done one-to-one support with young people, not academic support, but support. I've done that, and it can be really intense, and you can feel like you're the only person that knows what's going on for that young person because they've just pulled the heart out to you. Number one, it probably isn't. Will be other people that they're talking about. Number two, you have a kind of a professional responsibility almost to look after yourself and to go, right, what do I need before I see that young person again, or what do I need now that's going to help me reset and help me feel more able to carry on with my day.
Oh no, thank you, Becky. And that's really good to know. I didn't realise that you can use that charity as well for yourself. That's wonderful. So in those kind of moments, like you say, where it's feeling a bit, you can channel.
And we're not talking about crisis necessarily at the moment, but if you're ever with a young person who is experiencing a mental health crisis and you have no idea what to say, then you can sit with them and go, well, I'm going to text Shout now, and we're going to talk to them. And it takes a little bit of the pressure off because you've got someone else involved. So it's just a handy.
Well, no, that's wonderful. Thank you, Becky. And I know there are some wonderful resources on Twinkl that you'd recommend as well, like from the wellbeing checking activities and like the worrying and control, and we'll link those in. But if I can just pivot to what is kind of my final question, which is quite a big one, and I'm sure you probably could go on forever about it. But if there's one thing, or perhaps if one is a bit too kind of mean, a couple of things that you wish all tutors knew about supporting mental health, what would you say? How would you answer that?
I think I can pretend this is one thing. It's just going to be a long paragraph, but one thing is you don't have to have the answers. You don't be able to fix whatever this young person is telling you about, and they don't expect you to fix it. I mean, the chances are they've been dealing with this for a long time. They're not going to imagine you're this magic adult that can say one thing and it's all solved. So you don't have to fix it. If they're sharing with you, it's because they trust you, so pat yourself on the back for that. But the key things, we've kind of covered it, are listen to what they're saying, normalize it. So it's, you know, lots of people do struggle with these things, or it's really normal to be worried about your exams, or it's normal to feel upset if mum and dad are arguing, whatever the situation is. Validate it. So that's to say, I can understand why you would be feeling that way. Far too often with young people, we go, oh, well, you'll get over it, or what do you have to worry about? You don't have to pay bills or anything like that. We think we're helping them, but we're not. So validating, yeah, that sounds really difficult. And then empowering them. What do you want to happen next? What's your next step? So I think that was a bit of a cheat, Susie. It wasn't quite one, but kind of all in.
Yes, yeah, we put it in that basket. No, and that's such a great one. I think that, you know, a big thing I've taken away from this fantastic Spill the Tea sesh with you today, Becky, is that, yeah, like you say, you don't have to have all the answers, that you're not this magic adult, and you can kind of then sit back and kind of breathe a little bit, your shoulders drop, and you think, yes. So, and that's really empowering, and it's really good to hear. And no, thank you so much, Becky. What a fantastic talk on such an important topic, and one that sometimes I feel that tutors we're either unsure of who to turn to. So thank you for sharing so many tips, and we'll make sure to link in the resources that you're going to recommend as well. But thank you so much for spilling the tea with us today.
Susie, thanks for having me.